Good morning, everyone. It is, you have to be here for the last session, so I think what they did is they said from least importance to most important. So you see which one I drew. When we talk about reclaimed water, when we think out, what's the state going to look like in 20 or 30 or 40 years? And most politicians, worry about what's going to happen in the next 2 years because they may have to get reelected in 2 years. And I can assure you that is not my concern. I was very blessed and fortunate to be reelected this year without opposition, and so I now have 4 years to work on these issues. But 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, my 5-month-old tomorrow grandchild will live in Florida, I hope, and I hope I'm still living here. And what are our lakes and streams and rivers going to look like in 20, 30, 40 years? And what I hope is that there are, we went through a lot of destruction through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s in these areas. We've drained a lot of water out of this state. And what I hope is over the next 20, 30, 40 years, we put a lot of that back in place to where we can have our natural habitats. Reclaimed water, why is this important? Right now today in the state of Florida, we're going to put approximately 700 million gallons of reclaimed water in our rivers, Gulf, or ocean. I believe, and I've read this somewhere, so I use it, but I believe that represents about 7 to 8% of the aquifer withdrawal on a daily basis. And why is that important? You heard earlier that we are running out of resources in our major metropolitan areas. How are we going to replenish those resources? First of all, without water, again, 2 years ago, working on the Everglades bill was very important. Working on Springs legislation is very important, and we're going to get that bill done this year, I hope. But with reclaimed water representing 7 or 8% of our total daily use can go a long ways to recharging our aquifer. Why is this important? Everything we do in our economy is driven by water. The main leading driver of the economy today, tourism. Water is something we need, all types of water. Look at the Indian River Lagoon. Look what happens if we continue to let that pollution flow that direction. We have to have water resources in Florida to sustain our economy, for our tourism, agriculture. A lot of times we take agriculture for granted because we have plenty of food. The United States has, of all industrialized countries, the cheapest food of all countries. So we take it for granted somewhat, but it's one of the leading drivers of the economy. And then growth in the state of Florida. How do we continue to grow our economy? We have 700 people a day moving to the state of Florida. How do we have those resources available? Well, last year, Senate Bill 536 initiated a study to tell us what the best way to utilize these reclaimed water resources was. There are many, there's many impediments to getting the water where we need it. But what can we do with this water? We're always looking for storage. Aquifer recharge is a major component that's going to be a part of this reclaimed water study, I believe. You're going to look at reclaiming wetlands. We're going to look at utilities being able to use reclaimed water, agriculture being able to use this water. And I'm going to say this out loud now because I believe this is where we're going. We're going to drought-proof ourselves. Over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, the state of Florida needs to become drought-proof to a 1 or 2 year event. In some areas of the state, they're working on that through other storage projects. But if we can use this reclaimed water appropriately and recharge our aquifer and wetlands, it solves a lot of the other problems that we currently have, the saltwater intrusion alike. And, in West Pasco County, where I'm from, part of my district is where we are pumping 70 or 80 million gallons a day into the Tampa Bay water system, and we have a tremendous amount of sinkholes in that area. If we can reclaim that water from that area and recharge the aquifer in those areas where they're pumping that out, we may have an effect even on sinkholes. So I think as we look around the state and as we study these issues, recharging the areas in which the vast majority of these waters are coming from is not only going to help, I believe, from a sinkhole perspective, but look what it's going to do for our spring sheds, lakes, rivers. If you go into East Pasco County where those waters are at all-time lows in our lakes, with all the water we've been blessed with in the last 2 years, we're still not at historic highs. The Withlacoochee River has not flooded in the last 2 years. It's probably been above flood stage, but I've lived there for 40 years. I know what the difference is. It has not flooded. It's gotten high a few times, and we've created all these straws to get rid of the water. So we're going to have to utilize those waters appropriately if we're going to continue to sustain growth in the state of Florida, and if we want the state of Florida to be better tomorrow than it is today. Some of the impediments, and these are the concerns of our local governments, and they should be concerns of our local governments. The number one issue that we hear about and is going to be addressed in this study is fiscal constraints. I believe that those fiscal constraints can be overcome through properly using state resources. I just think the state is going to have to look internally and say, what should the state of Florida be in the business of doing? The state of Florida has to educate our population. We have to have critical infrastructure, ports, roads, and alike. And water resources I believe, is high on that list. So there may be things we're doing today as a state of Florida we cannot do because of having to deal with our water resources and environmental issues. I think it's that important if we're going to continue to sustain our quality of life. When we say that is that local governments are fearful that we're going to just do an unfunded mandate. And I am committed, as are other senators, that we're not going to do that. This is not going to be an unfunded mandate. We are going to put some date certains. I believe at the end product we'll have date certain when reclaimed water will have to be reused, and we will bring substantial resources of state tax revenue to bear on that issue. What I believe is, though, is I believe that local governments should be getting prepared sort of in an MPO type process for their projects. How are we best going to do this? I'm looking forward to this study being finished. It will not be completed till next December. So we're looking at maybe some implementation in this fiscal year. And then, of course, when we come back the following year, we will really look at bringing in the resources that are going to be required. This is going to be a 20-year project, and this is not going to happen overnight. And it's going to take us a long time. We didn't get in this problem in 2 or 3 years, and we're not going to get out of it in 2 or 3 years. But I hope what you will see is resolve and substantialness from your legislature on this issue. Other constraints, infrastructure, availability, and the regulatory process. We can do things about the regulatory process in the state of Florida. I believe that the Army Corps and the federal government hopefully will get on board and allow us to do what we need to do in a timely fashion. One of my biggest complaints about government is that we have great ideas, and it takes 3 years to do a study, and it takes another 3 years to implement, and before we can do anything, 10 years have gone by. We do not have 10 years on this issue. I believe next year and the following year, we need to substantially put in place a plan that has got timelines and a certainty of when this water will be reused. So I'm hoping that we do not do government on this one. I hope we get out of the way of ourselves and let it happen. The other, and probably the last thing I would like to say, and I don't know if we're doing questions today, but be glad to answer a few. The water management districts do a great job of controlling an area of the state. I believe it's going to be important, not only in reclaimed water, but also in spring sheds and other water issues. Those lines are going to disappear. The water management districts are going to exist as they do, but the notion that we're going to say, well, we can only go up to this line because this ends our district, I believe that era has passed. So, and if it hasn't passed, we're going to work very hard to make it pass. And we have to look at water as a statewide issue. This is a statewide issue. When it is flooding in North Florida, a lot of times it is not. We're in drought in South Florida and vice versa. We need the ability to put our water where we need it and continue to hydrate our wetlands and watersheds. And I believe that's part of this. I believe that part of the reclaimed water bill will bring that to pass. So I think we're on to something here with reclaimed water and other projects, and you'll hear from great speakers today. And Senator Montford's here. I see him in the crowd. He's been a soldier in these areas. He's been a great teammate and partner, and does a very good job in the Senate helping us with these issues. So if we have time, I'll be glad to answer if there are a few questions or if that's appropriate.
We have time.
Okay.
Anybody? Can we just call on somebody randomly?
The question is what level of nutrient loading will come from the reclaimed water? And I think what will happen is there will be a tiered system, and it'll depend on the uses. If you're going to a utility or in some agricultural applications, what we do today is probably okay. Well, it is okay. It can be used. If we're going to recharge the aquifer, clearly this is going to be drinking water, quality water. And that's going to be a process, and it's going to take resources and dollars. But that's where we need to go. If we are using, we're talking about building large reservoirs to hold reclaimed water. We have them. It's called the aquifer. If we bring our reclaimed water to drinking quality standards, potable water standards, we can and that's, I think, ultimately where we need to end up. So I think that there are several uses getting to our final goal that'll be helpful and use a lot of this water, but ultimately it's going to be drinking quality water that we're going to put back in that aquifer. And by putting it in the aquifer, of course, we'll have less bleed off from evaporation. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you for having me this morning. Look forward to working with you next year.